I overheard my children discussing how my inheritance would be divided, when I would be gone, and who would get what treasure. It all started with small infractions, the kind that are usually forgiven. A brochure about a retirement village tucked under the kettle. A cheerful reminder that stairs can be dangerous at your age. My son was fixing a squeaky hinge I hadn't allowed him to touch. Then he lingered in the hallway upstairs, eyeing the doorway. Then I discovered that my filing cabinet had been moved. The folder containing our mortgage papers was missing and reappeared a day later, upside down, as if it had been stuffed back in a hurry. "You were always practical," my daughter said, opening my storage cabinet. "Wouldn't it be nice to have your money under control? One signature, and you'd never have to worry about bills again." "I know where every dollar goes," I said. "I've known for 40 years. When I was a widow, I learned to sit perfectly still while people, even kind ones, tried to ruin my life. I carried a notebook in my purse, names, times, words. The habit returned one day when I watched my brother-in-law count my pill bottles as if it were his assignment. He smiled when I noticed. I smiled back. I made 2 appointments, one with a doctor, one with a lawyer. The doctor asked me to close my eyes and draw a clock, then asked what I had for breakfast. I put each number in its place and refused to tell him about the oatmeal. He laughed, wrote something on a form without losing his mind, and hugged me in the hallway. The lawyer, Miss Alvarez, a woman with eyes that missed nothing, didn't laugh. She placed a yellow legal pad between us and began drawing squares. "This is your house," she said, tapping one square. "This is your savings. This is your ring. We'll hide it where no one can get their hands on it." "A vault?" I asked. "A trust," she said, "and a document that will keep your house yours until your last morning in it, no matter who knocks on the door. You will choose a neutral trustee. You will choose a guardian for your decisions if you can't make them. Not the child, not the child's spouse. My children will be hurt," I said. "They will be safe from themselves," she said. I signed where she pointed, took a breath, and felt something in my chest stretch back to its full length. We kept it clean. A revocable living trust with a no-contest clause. A durable power of attorney. Naming a professional fiduciary. A transfer on death deed with a reserved life estate. Healthcare directives with 2 backups who weren't related. We wrote letters, calm, not sentimental, explaining what I had decided and why. We put copies in a folder the color of plums. I bought a small safe that fit under the sink behind the cleaning rags. I told no one. The day I overheard my children dividing my life, I was ready. I stood in the doorway a long time, longer than comfort allowed, and let them see me see them. When I asked if they wanted what was best for me or easiest for them, my son's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My daughter stared at the oranges in the bowl and said nothing at all. 2 days later, she called and invited me to lunch. "Just us," she said, sugar in her voice. We met at a place with white tablecloths and a windowsill full of succulents. She complimented my sweater, then pressed her napkin to her lips and said there'd been some confusion. Of course they loved me. Of course they were only trying to be prepared. "You know how thoughts haunt you in the middle of the night," she murmured, "after what happened to Dad." "What happened to your father," I said, "is that he died with a wrench in his hand and my name in his mouth, and I miss him every morning." She flinched and recovered. "We booked you a memory test," she said lightly. "Friday. It will put everyone at ease." I stirred my tea. "Friday is fine," I said, "but I'm bringing a friend." Friday arrived with bright cold sunlight. The memory test office had a receptionist whose nails glittered like ice and a conference room that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. My daughter and son were already seated when I walked in with Miss Alvarez. Their faces rearranged so fast I heard the click. "This is my attorney?" I said, placing the doctor's letter on the table. She'll be present for any document you ask me to sign. My son-in-law, who had come just to drive, cleared his throat. Mom, this isn't adversarial. Then it shouldn't bother you, I said, and sat. The man who walked in was not a doctor. He was a lawyer with a folder already open to the page he wanted me to see. Power of attorney, transfer of assets, a signature line as hungry as a mouth. He had the decency to lose his patter when Ms. Alvarez introduced herself and slid my documents across for him to read. Trust, deed, directives, all in force as of last week. Delivered to the county and the bank. There must be some misunderstanding, he said finally. There isn't, Ms. Alvarez replied. My daughter folded her hands. We were just trying to help. I know, I said. That's why I'm helping you not to hurt me. If I had ended it there, perhaps they could have stepped back without shame. But something in them had been woken, the part that grips a thing because your hand is already there. My son-in-law called me the next morning and apologized for the confusion. He offered to fix my porch light that very evening. I poured coffee, watched the street, and locked the door. The porch stayed dark until my neighbor's boy came by with his toolbox and a proud smile. Got a minute, Ms. Dee? He asked from the steps. I can swap that bulb. My mom worries when she comes home late. Come in, Mateo, I said. There are cookies cooling. He stood on the third step and stretched. The light winked to life. My uncle showed me how to do this, he said, dusting his hands. Saves calling a guy. I had a guy, I said, and handed him a cookie. He forgot how to be useful. He grinned with all the sweetness of 17. I gave him $5 and a second cookie for his mother. After he left, I sat with my coffee and listened to the house breathe. I had promised myself I would not punish. I would protect. There is a difference, though from the outside it can look the same. I set about the business of making my life heavy in the places where people might try to lift it. I closed the safe deposit box I'd shared with my husband and opened a new one in my name with a bank across town. I inventoried the things that were more than things. The ring my husband had bought me when we were young and foolish, and he'd brought home a toolbox and a velvet box in the same week. His wool coat that still held a whisper of winter. The letter he'd written the night before our daughter was born, which I had read only twice. I moved the ring to the new box. In its place, I left a twin with a stone that caught the light and none of its weight. When my daughter came by on Sunday and offered to clean the ring for me, I sat very still. She lifted the velvet from the drawer and her hand trembled only once. She turned the ring over, examined the prongs, and slipped it into her purse. I'll take it to the jeweler, she said. They'll do a better job. Thank you, I said, and followed her to the door. A week later, she returned the twin, polished to an impossible shine. She placed it in my palm and kissed my cheek. I closed my fingers and felt the lie press into my skin. I did not call the police. I did not shout. I took the ring to the jeweler 2 days later and asked him to write down what he saw. He wrote quickly, glanced up at me once, and said, I'm sorry. I thanked him and put the paper in the plum folder. That night, the house wouldn't settle. Pipes sighed. The stairs clicked to themselves. I sat in the dark kitchen, the only light the stove clock's green eye. I thought of my daughter, a newborn with black hair and a cry like a blade. I thought of the day she pierced her ears against my wishes and came home with twin sapphires and apologies made in a rush. I thought about shame, how it curls you inward until you look smaller, and how easy it is to mistake that for humility. Morning arrived with rain. I baked bread and let the smell undo a little of what the night had done. Somewhere after lunch, I called Miss Alvarez. I have changed my mind, I said. About what? About how visible this needs to be. Visible can be safer, she said. It can also make people desperate. I know, I answered, but silence makes me small. We planned the gathering as if it were any other family dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes smashed with butter and pepper, bread from the oven. I invited the children and told them to bring the grandchildren. I called my pastor and asked if his wife could come by with the sign-up sheet for the church scholarship fund. I asked my neighbor to come for a slice if she had time after her shift. I invited Miss Alvarez and told her to bring an appetite. I set the table with the good plates and put an old record on the player, the vinyl soft as a worn-out coat. The house filled with coats, laughter, the sound of small feet. For a while we were ourselves, the selves we are when no one is keeping score. My granddaughter, Lila, dark-eyed and careful, helped me in the kitchen and stole a piece of skin from the roasting pan. "Don't tell," she whispered. "I never do," I said. We ate. We passed the gravy. We admired the way the youngest had learned to tie her shoes. When the table quieted, I stood. "I have some news," I said. "I think it's time I told you how I have arranged things." My son put down his fork. My daughter reached for her water. The room pulled itself tight. "I have put the house and my savings into a trust," I continued. "A professional will manage it when I cannot. The house will be mine until I take my last breath in it. After that, it will not be sold." "Not be sold?" my son repeated. "Then what?" "It will become a small library and after-school space," I said, "for the neighborhood." "In your father's name?" The silence was a living thing. It moved around the table and touched each face. Lila's eyes widened. My neighbor put her hand to her mouth. The pastor's wife smiled slowly, as if she had known all along. "You can't," my son said, the words breaking apart as they left him. "You can't just give away the house." "I can," I said. "I have. It will still welcome you whenever you want to come, while I am here. After, it will welcome other people's children the way it welcomed you. And you will always be able to walk in and say, 'My mother made this.'" My daughter's voice returned in a whisper. "What about us?" "You will still inherit," I said. "Not the house, not the savings, but you will receive 2 things I chose for you and something else besides." "What?" her husband snapped. "What else besides?" "Relief," I said, "from the weight of imagining what you will do with what isn't yours yet." My son surged to his feet. "So we get nothing." "You get what I know you can carry," I said, "and a promise to my grandchildren that they will always have a place in this world with a light on." My daughter's fingers hovered over her purse, then withdrew. "This is punishment," she said. "This is protection," I answered. "For me." "For you. From yourselves." "You've always been dramatic," she said, and something broke in her voice, not where anger lives, but where embarrassment does. I looked at her for a long time. "I know what you did with my ring," I said quietly. "I didn't call anyone." "I could have. I didn't because I preferred to let you choose the person you wanted to be in this family from now on. If you bring it back, no one else needs to know. If you don't, the choice will become yours to explain." Her face went still, as if we'd both stepped into ice. My son-in-law rose halfway out of his chair and then sat down again. "How could my own daughter—" I began and stopped. "You will decide what you carry." Miss Alvarez cleared her throat softly. "May I?" she asked. I nodded. She explained concisely the legal shape of things. No contest clause, professional fiduciary, life estate, the fact that contests would risk forfeiting what was left to them. She did not gloat. She did not weaponize the law. She simply held it up to the light. The grandchildren had grown very quiet. I poured milk and passed the breadbasket again. The pastor's wife leaned across and asked Lila about school. Lila looked at me, then back at her plate. When dinner ended, people left in twos and threes like shy animals. My son hugged me stiffly, then with both arms the way he did when he was small and scared of thunder. "This feels like a betrayal," he said into my shoulder. "It feels like a boundary," I said. "They are not the same." My daughter stood in the doorway with her purse and her trembling mouth. "I'll bring the ring tomorrow," she said. "Thank you," I answered, and meant it. The next morning, before the sun had cleared the church roof, she was at my door. She didn't ring the bell. She knocked the way she had when she was a teenager who'd missed curfew and wanted to wake only me. She placed the ring on my palm without a word. I opened the safe and returned it to its velvet. When I turned back, her face was drowned in tears. "I don't know why I did it," she whispered. "I think something in me was afraid you loved that ring more than you love me." "I love the hand that gave it to me," I said. "It taught me how to love you." She nodded and looked at the floor. "He would have hated what we were doing." "He would have forgiven you," I said, "but he would have told you the truth first." "What's the truth?" "You are stronger than your fear," I said, "and kinder than your husband's plans." She flinched. I let the silence be a kindness. She left with nothing in her hands and something new in her eyes. You might think this is where it ends. With the reveal and the return of the ring, shame distributed like salt to melt old ice. But shame doesn't melt on command. It runs its own course. On Wednesday afternoon, there was a knock that came from the careful part of the knuckles. 2 people stood on my porch with matching lanyards and neutral faces. Adult Protective Services. "We received a call," the woman said, not unkindly, "an anonymous report of potential exploitation." My living room had never looked so staged. The couch, the family photographs, the books with their tired spines, all of it suddenly evidence. I asked them to sit. I made tea because I did not know what else to do with my hands. "Do you manage your own finances?" the man asked. "Yes." "Has anyone asked you to sign something you didn't understand?" "Yes." "Did you sign it?" "No." "Do you feel safe in your home?" "Yes." I opened the plum folder and laid out the letters. Doctor, attorney, trust, deed, power of attorney naming a woman who was not blood and therefore not invested in making me easy. I handed them Miss Alvarez's card. I watched their shoulders lower. "People often weaponize concern when they don't get their way," the woman said quietly, and it broke my heart that it had to be said often. "Will you tell me who called?" "No," the man answered, "but we will note the condition of your home and your documentation." "You seem exceptionally prepared." "I am old," I said. "Preparation is a love language." When they left, I stood at the window and watched them go. Across the street, Mateo waved from his scooter. I waved back. The little ordinary things, lit by a bureaucracy's flashlight, looked beautiful and breakable all at once. That night, my phone lit up with a message from my son-in-law. Not an apology, an explanation that wasn't one. "We were worried," he wrote. "The house needs work you can't afford." The taxes alone. He attached a link to a news story about property values. He added a suggestion that if the library plan failed, he knew a buyer who would honor your legacy. There was a number attached to the message, a large one, followed by more zeros than decency. I typed nothing for a long time. Then I forwarded the message to Miss Alvarez with 2 words, "For the folder." I slept badly again. In the morning, I made a second pot of coffee and called the city planning office to ask about permits for a small library in a residential home. The woman on the phone, whose voice had the patient rasp of someone who'd taken 1,000 similar calls, told me about zoning variances and parking requirements. It's not impossible, she said, but it will require a public hearing. When? I asked. Soon, she said. There's a slot in 6 weeks if you can post notice and submit the plan. By noon, Miss Alvarez had recommended an architect named Page who had designed a handful of tiny spaces that served large purposes. Page arrived the next day with a measuring tape, a pencil behind one ear, and a habit of looking at rooms as if they had something to confess. "We won't ruin it," she said immediately, reading my face. "We'll coax it." What does coaxing look like? Shelves in the dining room where talking is already a habit, a reading nook in the front bay, a ramp that feels like an invitation, not a demand, a shed out back for the donated books that will multiply like bread. How do you know they will? They always do, she said, and smiled. We worked fast. The children did not come by. Lila did, under the pretense of needing quiet for a school project. She sat on the stairs while Paige measured, watching with the intentness of someone who had grown wary of surprises and wanted to see one take a good shape. On the third day, she crossed the room to where the light fell right and said, "Here. This is where the window seat should go." Paige marked the spot without comment and later told me she was right. At night, I wrote a speech for the zoning hearing. It wasn't a speech so much as a list of facts dressed in a soft sweater. I wrote about my husband teaching neighborhood kids how to use a level, about the evenings we had dragged the couch to the window to watch the storm and count between lightning and thunder, about the children who had already found their way to my coffee table with their homework and their sighs. I did not write about betrayal. I did not write about shame. I wrote about the library's name, Daniel's Light. The week of the hearing, the city posted a notice on my fence. Someone else posted a flyer on the telephone pole across from my house. Say no to traffic. Protect property values. Keep the street quiet. The paper flapped in the wind. Mateo tore it down, then hung it back up with a note that said, "Come talk to Ms. D before you panic." I didn't ask him to do it. He didn't ask my permission. He simply did the right thing the way young people sometimes do, more cleanly than their elders. 2 nights before the hearing, I woke to a sound that didn't belong to the house. Soft, deliberate, not the settling of old wood. I sat up. The clock said 2:14. The porch light, which had been steady since Mateo changed the bulb, flared once and died. I didn't call the police right away. I stood in my bare feet beside the front door and listened. There was a scratch where there shouldn't be one, the thin complaint of metal teasing metal. The deadbolt shifted. I slid the chain into place and stepped back. The door held. The scratching stopped. A shape moved past the window, tall, hunched against the cold. I couldn't see the face. I could see the coat. I had bought that coat for my son-in-law 3 Christmases ago. I called this time. The dispatcher asked if I was alone, if I felt safe, if there was a gun in the house. "Only my mouth," I said, and regretted it immediately because humor is what I reach for when I am terrified. The patrol car slid up to the curb with lights off. A soft knock. "Ma'am?" They found nothing. Whoever it was had left when the chain sang against the strike plate. I didn't say the code out loud. I didn't need to. One of the officers glanced at the flyer on the pole and sighed. "We'll swing by tonight," he said, and I believed him. In the morning, I called a locksmith. He replaced the deadbolt with one that would look a stranger in the eye. He showed me how to use the new camera in the doorbell. He admired the plans on the table. "My sister runs a daycare," he said. "They said she couldn't do it on her block either." Then half the block started volunteering there. The hearing day arrived with sky the color of laundry water. Miss Alvarez drove. Paige met us in the parking lot holding a tube of drawings and a thermos of tea. The council chamber smelled like floor polish and nerves. Our names were on the docket between setback variance for pergola and noise complaint regarding auto shop. We sat. We listened to other people's worries. Then they called me. I don't remember the first sentence. I remember the feeling of my voice finding its place. I remember the way the room changed temperature when I said, "after school," the way Paige's drawings looked like promises when the lights dimmed to show the slides. I remember the man who stood to ask if this would make his own property worth less. I remember the woman behind him who stood and said, "worth less than children learning to read?" And the ripple that went through the room like a laugh you aren't sure you're allowed. Then my son-in-law walked in. He was dressed for battle, the tie that meant he had rehearsed, the stack of papers that meant he planned to make noise without raising his voice. He introduced himself not as my family, but as a neighbor concerned about traffic and liability. He had numbers. He had quotes from regulations. He had a petition he said he had gathered in 2 days. He did not look at me. "Sir," the council chair said after 7 minutes, "do you have a specific harm to cite?" "Only the obvious," he replied, "and the lack of transparency about funding." "Funding?" I said from the podium. "I baked bread." People gave $10 at a time. "My husband left me a life that fit in my hands. I did not sell what you want to buy." He finally looked at me. There was something wild in his eyes. I felt nothing but tired. The chair called for comments from those in support. Mateo's mother stood and spoke about coming home late from the hospital and knowing there was a light on at my porch if she needed to knock. The pastor's wife spoke about the scholarship line that wrapped around the fellowship hall each spring. Lila, who had slipped in with her backpack, stood and said, "I like doing my homework at my grandma's because it feels like the room is rooting for me." She sat down quickly, cheeks flushed. My daughter did not speak. She sat in the back with her hands folded, her wedding ring turning around and around on her finger as if it were searching for the true north of her hand. When it ended, the vote was 3-2 in favor. We had the variance. The chair banged a small wooden hammer that looked like a toy and said, "Good luck, ma'am." I thanked him. I thanked everyone with my eyes because my mouth had stopped working. Outside, my son-in-law waited near a pillar, his face blank. He did not approach me. He approached Miss Alvarez. "You're bleeding her dry," he said. "No," she answered. "I'm keeping her whole." "You think you won," he said to me. "I think the children won," I replied and meant it. He shook his head the way people do when they've run out of words that make sense to them. He walked away. My daughter watched him go and did not follow for a long time. The weeks after the hearing were full in the right way. Paige's crew, 2 women with forearms like ropes and a man who hummed while he sanded, worked softly around the life of the house. They slid the dining table 3 feet to the left and built shelves into the wall with care that felt like prayer. The window seat grew from the bay like a thought you almost had earlier but didn't know how to hold. People came by with boxes, picture books retired from their children's rooms, dictionaries with spines broken in useful places, a set of encyclopedias so old they were new again. The neighborhood learned a fresh path to my door. One afternoon, between hammer taps, Mateo sat cross-legged on the floor with a book about circuits open on his lap. "If I could study here until 6, he asked, "would that be okay?" "My mom works late this week. As long as you leave a crumb trail so she can find you," I said, and his grin made the room brighter than any bulb. The first time the doorbell camera captured my son-in-law's face, he was across the street. He stood by the pole where the flyer had been. He looked up at the sky as if it might give him instructions, then down at his phone. He didn't step toward the house. He didn't step away. He clicked into and out of the frame like a thought he couldn't finish. I closed the app and went back to sorting donations. I kept expecting the ring to feel different back in its place, as if its return had corrected the tilt of the world. It didn't. It felt like what it was. Metal, stone, a store you can put on your finger. The correction happened somewhere else. I noticed it at church, when my daughter reached for the communion tray and her hand steadied in midair instead of shaking. I noticed it when my son called to ask if I needed anything from the hardware store and didn't urge an answer. He arrived with a bag anyway, a new timer for the porch light, a pack of felt pads for the chair legs, a length of weather stripping we installed together with our shoulders pressed like we were holding each other up, not the door. Lila drifted in and out of my days with her quiet questions. "Do people stay who don't read?" she asked, watching two boys play chess on the rug. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes the book is the room." "Is that what this is for you?" she asked me. "It is for the little girl I was," I said, "and the woman I didn't plan to be." "How could they think they could take it?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Because love looks like ownership when you squint," I said, "and because fear makes accountants out of us all." The library opened on a Saturday. We did not cut a ribbon. We put out a plate of cookies that disappeared and then reappeared as if by miracle because 3 different women in the neighborhood had the same thought at the same time. Children arranged themselves on cushions like flowers, figuring out where the sun was. The pastor's wife cried twice and apologized for it 3 times. Paige leaned against the newel post and watched her work fade into the room the way a good seam disappears. Miss Alvarez arrived late, laughing at herself for missing the turn. She wore jeans for the first time since I'd known her and looked 10 years younger for it. At noon, my son walked in, holding 2 paperback novels that smelled like damp cardboard. "Dad wanted you to read these," he said, pushing them into my hands. It was a thing his grief told him to say, and I let it stand, because sometimes kindness is letting a sentence pretend it is true. "They're awful," I said after reading the back covers. "I know," he said. He gave up on both at page 36. He'd want to laugh at us for trying them again. We did. We laughed. It felt like pulling a thorn we'd been trying to work around for months. My son-in-law did not come. My daughter came alone, walked the perimeter, touched every shelf as if it were a fence she was testing for strength. When she stopped at the plaque and read my husband's name, her mouth went soft. "Do you remember," she said, "how he used to fix things with whatever was lying around? The vacuum with the rubber band, the bird bath with the leftover grout. He once used a spoon," I said, and we both smiled into the same memory. She exhaled. "I told him last night that I'm going to counseling." He laughed like it was cute. I told him it wasn't a discussion. How did he take that? "He slept on the couch," she said, "in your old coat." She swallowed. "He'll be angry for a while." "I know," I said. "Anger is the mask fear wears when it is trying not to confess." She looked up at me. "How are you so sure all the time?" "I'm not," I said. "I just don't let doubt drive." In the back room, a box sat where I had asked the architect to leave it on a high shelf. It was the color of old paper. It held the letters my husband had written to me through the years that had no reason to be kept except that I kept everything he put into my hands. I took one down after the last visitor left and sat on the new window seat with my feet tucked up the way I used to sit when I was young and my knees didn't argue. The letter at the top had a coffee ring on it that matched a mug we'd broken and glued 3 times. The first line made me laugh. The second line made me ache. "If you are reading this because I am not there to say it out loud," the letter began, "then I'll work with what I've got and use the ink." I didn't know he had written me a future. I didn't know the man who fixed things with spoons had left me a tool for this. A week later, I got a call from the bank. A polite woman asked me to confirm that I had applied for a home equity line of credit. I have not, I said, and felt the slow heat climb my back. Then we'll flag it, she said, and we'll need you to come in. The application had my name and a signature that tried very hard to be mine. It also had a contact number that was 1 digit off from my son-in-law's cell. When the banker looked up, her eyes had softened in a way I recognized. Pity that was really anger in a cardigan. I'd like a copy, I said, for my folder. We'll open a case, she replied. Do you know who submitted it? I asked. I shouldn't say, she answered, which is its own kind of answer. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, which had burned itself down to coals and now only flared when something blew on it, but out of an old grief that returned with a new suit, the knowledge that this was going to sink my daughter's marriage or teach it how to float with fewer lies. Either way, I could not be the one rowing. That is the hardest lesson. You can stand on your own shore and wave, but you cannot swim for them. I called Lila in the morning. Can you come by after school? She arrived with a face like weather. Is Mom okay? She asked before her backpack hit the floor. She will be, I said, but we have to walk through a storm to get there. I showed her the bank notice without details. I told her I had decided not to press charges. Not yet, I said. He will be told the bank flagged it. He will feel cornered. Cornered people run one of 2 ways: toward you for forgiveness or away from you with blame. Your mother will need you to stand in the doorway and decide who gets in. Why aren't you going to the police? She asked, honest and brave. Because punishment ends the story too early, I said. I want the lesson to finish. What if it doesn't? Then we'll pick up the phone together. That night, my daughter arrived without knocking. She looked like the truth had run over her. He says he did it for us, she said before she sat. Says the house is a waste. Says the money will go to strangers. Says we've been humiliated enough. Do you believe him? I believe he doesn't know the difference between want and need, she answered. I told him he had to apologize to you. He laughed. Did you ask him why he's afraid? I said. Sometimes when you ask, the answer is so small you can forgive it. I did, she said. He said he grew up without anything. He said he swore he'd never be poor again, even if he had to step on people to climb out. And you said? I asked him who he wanted to be married to when he reached the top of the pile, she said, because it wasn't going to be me. She stayed that night, slept in her old room with the window that looks like a mouth opening to the sky. In the morning, she made coffee and eggs, and we ate in the quiet that comes after a dam breaks and the river remembers its work. The bank called a week later to say the case was closed. The application had been withdrawn. The woman's voice sounded relieved. I pretended not to know why. I thanked her and filed the paper. I didn't ask my daughter what conversation had ended it. Some privacy is a gift you give the people you love when they are pulling a thread that could unravel their life. Spring leaned hard into summer. The library filled like lungs. We added a corkboard by the door where people could pin note cards with what they needed. Rides to the clinic. An extra set of hands for moving day. Someone to look a landlord in the eye. We did not write last names. We did not ask for them. We wrote down the help given and folded the paper into a jar like wishes. Mateo built a small free pantry on a post out front, canned beans, diapers, a box of pasta, and painted Daniel's light on it in letters that climbed and settled like steps. The city sent a letter telling us it was not permitted. We painted it the same color as the fence, and no one noticed anymore. The way kindness disappears into the scenery when you stop contesting it. I wrote grants at the kitchen table with my reading glasses sliding down my nose, the way my husband's safety glasses used to. I typed one sentence and then another, learning the grammar of asking without apology. We received a small foundation award that paid for new cushions and a better lamp. We received larger checks with tiny notes in the memo lines. For the kid who fixed my toilet. For the girl who reads to my mother at the nursing home. For the boy who hauled groceries up my stairs without being asked. My son came by on Thursdays. He brought me oranges and stories about his job that made me want to shake men in suits by their collars. He started staying after the kids left to fix what he called house commas, the places the house paused and needed help finishing its sentence. A cabinet hinge, a wobbly stair, the door that stuck in the afternoon and sighed open in the evening. He worked with a quiet that was apology without the language. One Thursday he stopped in the doorway, shaking out his hands the way his father used to when he'd been holding a tool too long. "I paid off the last of the credit card," he said, eyes on the floor. "It was mine, not yours. But I wanted you to know what I learned." "What did you learn?" I asked. "That I was hoping you would save me one more time," he said, "and that it is not love to be saved when you could do the work yourself." We stood there, separated by a slat of sunlight, and I felt the tremendous luxury of being alive for your child's self-respect. The ring sat in its velvet. Some days I wore it. Some days I didn't. It became a weather vane more than a jewel. On a Sunday after church, my daughter reached for my hand where the ring wasn't and didn't flinch at the absence. She had started seeing a counselor on Elm Street with a dog that lay across clients' feet like a weighted blanket. She told me this while we chopped carrots, as if she were telling me a recipe. She had moved into a small apartment with Lila and a potted fern that had already started leaning toward the window like hope. "I keep asking myself if I'm the villain," she said, knife steady. "It's a rotten question." "What answer do you want?" "I want the truth." "You did a selfish thing," I said. "And then you did a brave one. The villain would have stopped at selfish." She breathed out. "Thank you." Summer turned the neighborhood green and lazy. The library learned to run itself for an hour at a time when I needed to sit with my feet in a basin after the lunch crowd ate all the sandwiches and left their wrappers in the recycling instead of on the rug. Lila volunteered to read out loud on Tuesdays. Children stretched in a long line across the floor listening to her voice, which had a kindness in it that made you believe bad things could be put away carefully and not opened again until you were ready. I found the letter at the bottom of the box on a Tuesday after story hour. It was sealed. The envelope said, "Open when the house is full again." I laughed out loud at my husband's nerve. I broke the seal. "You always wanted rooms to have a job," the letter said, "and I always wanted them to have a soul. If you are reading this because the rooms are full, then we did right by both of us. Don't forget to keep a place for yourself in it. A chair that is only yours. A light that everyone knows not to turn off unless you ask them to. I am not coming back, but I am always arriving." The letter went on in his lopsided handwriting, teasing me for the way I hoarded teacups and praising me for learning how to use the drill without crying. At the bottom, in a different pen, as if he had added it later, he had written, "If they ever try to make you feel small, stand in the doorway until they see your height." I taped that sentence inside the kitchen cabinet where I keep the spices. I read it when I reach for the cinnamon. I read it when I reach for the salt. It worked like a vitamin. There was a final reckoning with my son-in-law, but it did not look like I'd rehearsed. He came one evening at dusk, hat in his hands like a boy who had caught himself misbehaving and didn't have a costume for remorse. He had grown thinner, in the way men do when their certainty is starving. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "Good," I replied and moved aside so he could enter the front room where the light fell the kindest. He looked at the shelves, at the window seat, at the chessboard with pieces mid-game. He put his hat down and picked it up again. "I was wrong," he said, "about the house, about the money, About what being a man is, I didn't say anything. There are apologies that want to be petted. I have 2 hands and neither is for that any more. I called EPS, he added, voice small, and I started the bank application. I told myself it was for the family. It wasn't. It was for me. And now? I asked. I'm going to sell my truck, he said. I'm going to pay down the debt I didn't tell your daughter about. I'm going to ask a friend if he'll let me apprentice at his shop on weekends, so I remember how to carry my weight like a person, not a crow. He swallowed. I'm going to sign whatever papers your attorney puts in front of me that say I get no say in your life. Paper won't fix your life, I said. I know, he answered. Work will. He stood to go. At the door, he turned. I love the light on your porch, he said. I always have. I didn't know how to admit that I was jealous of a bulb. It was a ridiculous sentence. It was the truth. Take a cookie, I said, and he laughed the way men do when they haven't in a while, and their chest isn't sure how to hold it. I didn't tell my daughter he had come. I didn't need to. He told her himself, and later she told me he was sleeping on his brother's couch and going to meetings in a church basement where the coffee is terrible and the honesty is strong. She didn't tell me whether she wanted him back. I didn't ask. You cannot plant a garden for someone. You can hand them seeds and leave the gate open. Autumn found the library wearing sweaters. The children traded sandals for boots. When it rained, the room sounded like a drum you could study to. We hosted a small workshop on tenant rights. We hosted a night where women came with their boxes and folders, and we put their papers in order so if anyone ever asked them to sign a thing, they would recognize it. Miss Alvarez stood at the table like a nurse. I made soup. Repair came in ways I didn't expect. My son started bringing over his old vinyl and teaching Mateo how to clean a record so the static wouldn't make the room itch. My daughter found the courage to look at our family chat and write, for the first time, no, when someone suggested I should move into a smaller place before winter. Lila wrote an essay for class about a place that felt like a hand around a cup of tea. She didn't name the house. She didn't have to. Her teacher came to find me anyway and cried in my kitchen the way only teachers do, silently and without wiping their eyes, like it would be rude to interrupt their own tears. I sometimes ask myself the ugliest question. What if the library is just a monument to my stubbornness? Then a girl with a bruise in the shape of a doorknob came to sit at the table and read about contract law, and a boy with a voice too loud learned how to lower it not because someone told him to, but because the room taught him without speaking. And a woman my age arrived with a bag of yarn and left with a calendar full of days she would teach teenagers to knit, and the question curled up and went to sleep. One winter morning, Ms. Alvarez called to say she was moving away. Her mother's health had tipped the scales of her week, and a sister in another state had a room and a spare car. I didn't realize, until she said it out loud, how much her number had become a rosary bead in my pocket. Who will hold the pen? I asked, the panic childlike and unbecoming. Someone I trust, she said. I won't leave without putting a hand on the next hand. She didn't. She introduced me to a man named Ravi who wore sweaters that looked like libraries and asked questions that made people tell the truth before they meant to. He met the neighbors. He came to the house on a Saturday when the front room was loud and happy, and he sat in the corner watching the way chaos and order can be married if you let them. You built this with rules, he said, but the rules are soft enough to hold people. Is that good? I asked. It's the only way it works, he replied. Before she left, Miss Alvarez came by alone. We sat at the kitchen table with the spice cabinet open like a small chapel, and she reached up and traced my husband's sentence with one finger. Stand in the doorway until they see your height, she read. He was kind. He was both, I said. Kindness without steel is decoration. You didn't need me, she said. I did, I said. Not for the papers. For the mirror. She nodded, and we cried the quiet way that doesn't frighten the birds. The night the first scholarship was awarded in the little room with its borrowed chairs and uneven floor, Lila stood at the front holding a certificate someone had made on a home printer. The boy who received it wore a tie that refused to lie flat. His mother held the check the way a person holds water. They know it can slip. My son clapped before anyone else did. My daughter took a picture and later sent it to me with a caption that said simply, "You did this." I wrote back, "We did. You want one more twist, don't you?" Life obliged. In spring, a letter arrived from a law firm I didn't know. For a moment, I feared my son-in-law had found a new way to make noise. I opened it with my breath stored away for later. It was a letter from a woman who had known my husband before I did. Not like that. In the plant where he worked during a summer between high school and the service, he had helped her find a way around a boss who liked to put his hand on the backs of women's necks as he walked by. She had been 17. He had been 19 and not afraid of being fired. 50 years later, she had made a bequest to the library at a community foundation, contingent on proof that it existed and that it was what she imagined, a place where no one put a hand on your neck unless you asked for it to guide you to a chair. "I don't know how he ended up," the woman had written, "but this is how he started. If you built something with his name on it that keeps girls safe, please accept this." The check was astonishing. Not zeros honking like a lottery. Just enough to expand the window seat and add 2 more lamps and pay Paige to come back and coax the back room into a small classroom where a few teenagers could learn to repair appliances and bicycles so the world felt less like it was waiting to break on them. I put the letter in the plum folder, which had become thick enough that closing it felt like closing a door that needed a shoulder. I thought of the girl my husband had stood behind, years before I ever knew his laugh. I said thank you to the room. It said you're welcome. A year passed. The house had new rhythms. The children inched into older versions of themselves right there on my rug. We had a plumbing leak and solved it. We hosted a poetry night and nobody died of embarrassment. The pantry emptied and refilled itself as if by weather. My daughter started sleeping through the night. My son-in-law sent, through Lila, a letter that said nothing you need to know, but everything he needed to say. I am sober. I am paying back the debt in a $100 envelope placed in your bank account on the 1st of every month, which your daughter has access to. I am not ready to ask for forgiveness, and that is, I believe, the first honest thing I have said in a long time. I told Lila to tell him thank you for learning a new language. One afternoon, a man came to the door with his cap in hand and his gaze on the porch floor. I knew him by the way he carried his shoulders, the neighbor who had signed the petition against us the year before. He had a boy with him whose eyes were like new pennies. "My son needs a place to sit after school," he said. "The house is loud." "Is there a fee?" "No," I said, "but he has to put the pieces back on the chessboard the right way." The boy smiled. "I know how." "Good," I said. "Teach me." When people ask how I did it, I tell them I didn't. I simply refused to be erased. I wrote myself into the next chapter in ink the color of plums, and when the time came to hold up a mirror, I held it steady. If you have lived long enough, you know that revenge is a knife that turns in your own hand. Justice is a wall that keeps out the wind and lets in the light. I chose the wall. And still, I kept something sharp for myself. A memory of my children at my table, heads bent in silent calculation, and the way their faces changed when I said the word library. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief, old and deep, the kind that leaves room for bread to rise and a granddaughter to turn pages late into the night. If you want the rest, the way the shelves filled, The afternoon my son came over with 2 paperbacks and a crying apology. The day Lila stood up to a teacher who tried to rearrange her story for extra credit. The evening my daughter and I sat on the porch steps counting moths and not talking about men. We can keep going. But now you know the shape of it. A woman who was supposed to sit down stood up, and the room had to rearrange itself around her height. I did not shrink. I did not sign. I learned the difference between punishing and protecting, and I chose the one that let my people find their way back without begging at my door. And when the wind blows just right, I still hear my husband in the rattle of the windows. Stand in the doorway until they see you. Then sit in your chair, the one no one turns off the light above, and let the children do their homework in the warm. That is the kind of revenge I can live with. That is the kind that feeds everyone at the table, even the ones who once came hungry for more than their share. So when I tell you I heard the children discussing how my inheritance would be divided, you must also hear what came next. The clatter of plates put back in the cupboard by the very hands that thought to empty it. The soft click of a pen cap never pulled off. The sigh of a door that opens and closes all day long and still somehow keeps out the cold. The library breathes. The house forgives but does not forget. And I, who once shook over a stack of papers in a lemon-polished room, now sign my name only on things that say yes to the living.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.